Welcome. You are now linked to your telecom retirement.
Hey, how are we doing today? We live in a sensationalized culture, and I want to kind of deal with that as it relates to your financial planning. But I want to kind of give you an example beyond this is a presidential election year. It's 2024 when I'm recording this, and my gosh, if any presidential candidate, hiccups the wrong way or says this differently, it's on 17 different news stations and people are talking about it. It's on Twitter and Reddit and all this other crazy stuff. So we're pushing it. Is our desire for more emotion pushes that. And one of the areas that it drives me bonkers in is the weather. And I think if you were to poll the average person on the street, answer this question for yourself. Is the weather worse, more severe, cold, hot, storms, things like that today than it was 30, 40 years ago? Average person on the street is going to say, oh, absolutely. It's terrible. It's there are so many more this and so many more that. And it's this and no, it's the same weather. It is the same weather. And this really started beyond the global warming thing. And global warming talks about things are going to get worse and worse weather-wise. And that's not necessarily true. They don't know that. There's a lot of global warming is happening. The effects of what it will do, they have no idea. But it was Weather Channel when they started naming the winter storms. Winter Storm Aloysius is headed towards Chicago. I'm sorry. Naming hurricanes was a big deal because Atlantic hurricanes affect a lot of people and there's not so many of them. And naming them as opposed to remember a year, you get to remember a name. Okay. And that was a NOAA thing, the government thing, but naming winter storms was that's a Weather Channel thing. And it's not that long in the past. 9 years ago was when we had the massive storms here in Massachusetts. My town, which averages something like 28 inches of snowfall per year. We got 100 inches of snow, 4 times the average, most they've ever recorded in that town. My son was 7 years old. We went out to the middle of the front yard and dug a hole and stuck him in and took a picture because you couldn't see him anymore after the 4th storm in a row. Those weren't named storms. It's since then that Weather Channel, all of this craziness this year. Actually, I guess it started last year. Now the big thing is heat dome. It's heat dome. Oh my gosh, heat dome. You got the heat dome. We've never heard this term before. It was probably out there, probably exists. I haven't done a whole lot of research on what heat dome is, but my gosh, it is just all over. The one I heard over the weekend, it was warm. The last couple of days as I've been recording this, it's been in the 90s, and they talked about heat wave. And I went, really? And they talked about the heat wave we had a couple of weeks ago. And I said, we didn't have a heat wave a couple of weeks ago. Now, when I was growing up, and I did look this up this morning. When I was growing up, the NOAA definition of a heat wave was 5 days in a row greater than 90 degrees at an official weather station. Logan Airport was one of them. So it was hard for Boston to get a heat wave because it was right on the water, but it was 5 days. Now it's 2. 2 days is a heat wave? Really? That means we're always having, more than likely, if you have one day that's 90 degrees, there's going to be another one next to it in the Northeast. It's the way it happens. And again, going to the sensationalism of that, when I was probably 10. So it was like 1979, 1980, somewhere in that. We would summer in Dennisport, Massachusetts on Cape Cod. Named after me, of course. We didn't go to Christown. We didn't go to Susanville. We went to Dennisport. And I think it was the first year we went. It might have been the second. We would go for 2 weeks. We had this cabin that was uninsulated. It was very rustic. I didn't think so at 10 or 11 years old. It was the coolest thing in the world. My brother and I were supposed to sleep upstairs in the loft. It was like 1,002 degrees up there. So we slept on the porch on lounge chairs, on chaise lounges. And we thought that was the coolest thing in the world. My little sister was a baby at that time. She was little. She was in a crib. So maybe it was 78, 79. And I remember we came home from 2 weeks vacation. Now we're 3 blocks from the beach, sea breeze every day. It's a big shady yard that we're in. So I guess it was hot, but again, I'm 9, 10, 11 years old. I don't notice those things too much, more so than I am at 55. And it's like, wow, it's hot. We got home and I guess there was a heat wave. There was a heat wave, like a massive one. I don't think it rained once in 2 weeks. It was beautiful down there. And I remember for that moment on, my mother's parents would go with us on these vacations. And my grandmother would say, Bud, that was my dad's nickname. Bud, you know how to pick them. Boy, do you know how to pick them, because they didn't want to be in Dorchester, in Boston, during a heat wave like that. So we get home anyways, drop Mimi and Pops off at their place. We drive all the way back to Easton. We walk into the house. It's a little warm in the house because it's been pretty much closed up. There's no fans running. The windows are just cracked. And I remember going into the dining room, and my mother had this sideboard, this walnut sideboard, and there were 2 candlestick holders with these 2 tall candlesticks in it, and those candlesticks were no longer straight up. They were over and almost touching the sideboard. That's how hot it got in our house. This type of weather has been going on. Weather is boring. Weather is very, very boring. We've sensationalized it, and now we all talk about it. As opposed to, used to be the old joke is, talk about the weather. Oh, the weather. Now it's like this big deal of, oh my gosh, did you hear about that? And the hurricane over here, and the tornado there, and the heat wave there. Because we're focusing more and more, it seems like it's a bigger deal. It's the same stuff, and it really is kind of boring. And the same thing goes for investing. And I'll tell you what kind of prompted all of this today is a couple of weeks ago, I must have been somewhere. I don't remember where I was. Must have been like out to lunch or something. And I was in a restaurant, and there was a TV in the background, and there was an ad running for Charles Schwab. And I love Charles Schwab. We work with Charles Schwab. And it was talking about, I forget exactly how they phrased it, but investing from your heart. And depending on what your interest is, we can give you 20 or 25 companies to really look into those areas. And they're like AI or EVs or cybersecurity or all these other categories. And I said, oh, that's different. And I wound up afterwards going online with Chuck Schwab and trying to take a look. And it was basically, they had, 10, 15, 20 different categories that they have kind of picked. I don't know if necessarily picked stocks, but picked stocks in terms of representative of those categories. And you can sign up and go in, and then you can pick your company so you can be invested in the cool things that you're seeing outside in the world. And I'm thinking, oh man, that's sensationalizing investing. And we've got to be very, very careful. Now, don't get me wrong. Buying into things that are new or up and coming can be a good idea. I think back to Peter Lynch, who was the Superman investor of Fidelity back in the 80s, wrote a book, and I forget the name of the book. Random Walk Down Wall Street. No, I don't think that was him. And he talks about that's how he found his ideas. One of his big ideas for Fidelity Magellan was Legs, which is now Hanes, Bally, whatever. And remember when Legs was sold in the grocery store, they had that tall round display with the eggs with the pantyhose in it. That was a big investment for Fidelity Magellan back in the day. He bought, I think, Motel 6, which was more a Southwestern regional hotel chain. There were a bunch of them. In the book, he talks about how he got involved in just things that interested him. And I remember the Legs thing because his wife comes home one day, literally, and walks in with groceries and says, look what I bought at the grocery store. I bought pantyhose at the grocery store. And he said, there's no way you can buy. You have to go to a department store and you have to talk to the lady and all of this. And it's a big hassle. And it was life-changing. So there's no question that you can invest that way. But sensationalizing is what concerns me. Probably 8 or 9 years ago, a new player came on the investing world, Robinhood. You may have heard of them, and they're a brokerage firm. And their thing was 8 or 9 years ago was it's commission free. We don't charge commissions. Now, what they do is, there's a price at which you buy a stock and there's a price at which you sell a stock. And if you bought and sold them simultaneously, you would guarantee yourself to lose money. The spread, the difference in between, is what the brokerage firm uses to cover their costs. And all Robinhood was doing was expanding those spreads. Or allegedly that's what they were doing. There was a big investigation of how they were doing this. Now pretty much everybody does it for free. What they've realized is the computers are doing it just about 99.999% of the work, and it doesn't cost them any money. So they're actually making a better profit on that spread than they thought before. But it was a big deal. And it was, hey, anybody can get into this, and it's cool and it's new and it's fun. And gosh, that still scares the pants off of me. That scared me 8 or 9 years ago watching that, and it scares me today. And then the other thing I was thinking about was a couple of years ago, right during the pandemic, there was this big run on GameStop and AMC movies, and those stocks took off and came crashing down. And it was a question of why. Well, there were these Reddit forums dedicated to investing. There were a couple of people that were pushing stocks. And again, it was really this stick it to the man type of mentality that was in this whole thing. Is we're smarter than Wall Street and we're going to do well. And most of the people that invested, the people that got in early, just like a pyramid scheme or many other things like this, the people that got in early, it provided they hung on and then sold at the correct time, made a fortune. Most people that dove in, that were the also-rans into it, because they had no idea. It was just sensationalized. They bought at the absolute highs, and as the stocks tumbled back down to reasonable levels, when there was no more hype, they lost all of that money, as that money was just vaporized out of their accounts. And I worry with this whole Schwab marketing campaign that could cause people to really look at investing as a game. And it's not a game. This is your financial livelihood going forward. There's nothing wrong with taking a portion that you can afford to lose of your portfolio and going into doing things that are interesting or fun. Is my old assistant, who retired 4 years ago, when her daughter was in high school, she wanted to buy this certain stock. I don't want to even mention the stock. She wanted to buy this certain stock, and this was her idea. She still holds it today, and I want to say she put $500 in, and it's worth $9,000 today. She's very happy. The daughter, she's in her early 30s, and she doesn't want to sell the stock. She still likes the company. She bought it because of the company, and that was fun. But that wasn't all of her investments. That wasn't all of my former assistant's investments. It was a small investment, and that's okay. But when we're looking at your real money, we want to be boring, just like the weather. We want it to be boring. Do you remember? You may not, because if you're not in the financial world or don't care at all, you would never watch the show because it was so awful. I think it was 8:00 on Friday nights for decades on PBS was Wall Street Week with Louis Rukeyser. If you had like an early, like a 2 a.m. flight or a 3 a.m. flight on Saturday morning, man, snapping that thing on 8:00 at night on a Friday, you were out inside of 10 minutes. He was the most boring man on television, bar none. And I had a business partner, a guy I used to work with back in the day, 20, 25 years ago, that would watch that show religiously. Like, he wouldn't go out on Friday nights so he could stay home. If he went out on Friday nights, he would record it. Back in the old VCR days, he would record the show so that he could watch it the next day and see what was going on. And it is just boring. And that's really what the stock market is. But these guys tried to make it exciting. It's just they couldn't because they were so dull. That's our view of the stock market. I had a situation, again, 25 years ago. I was on this online discussion group. I was probably on the forefront of that to some extent. Is I use it as one of those things that it teaches me. It helps me practice communicating. When you have to communicate via your keyboard over the internet without having the ability to inflect, you learn very well how to be able to write. I was working on that. I still do it to this day. And there was a guy in 99, 2000 that was buying tech stocks. That was buying internet stocks. He would buy CMGI or Alta Vista or whatever. And he was just a regular guy. He was a janitor at a public school, something like that. He was just a blue collar worker. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but he wound up amassing a portfolio of over $1 million. This is back in 1999. The guy probably made $35,000 a year. So think of how many dollars he amassed. And I remember discussing it with him in this public forum. I said, man, you just got to be careful. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Don't think that this is super cool. It should be boring. And he kept telling me, you don't understand, this is the new economy. You just don't have a clue. You're part of the old, he was older than me, which was the strange part. He was probably in his late 50s at the time. I'm 30. Yeah, you just don't get it. And you're one of those old fogies and the times have changed and this is the way it is. And 2001 happened and the internet companies just vaporized. A lot of them just went out of business, gone. And he stopped posting to that discussion group. That's how bad it was for him. He went from having a whole bunch of money to not a whole bunch of money and disappeared off the face of the earth. He just didn't want to face it because he got creamed. He got caught up in that. So I don't want you to do that. So there's a couple things that we want to look at. Again, we want to be boring. We don't want to get excited in terms of like a business venture. I was reading something just recently. I was listening to something just recently about it may have been Danny Kahneman, the great behavioral economist Danny Kahneman, just passed away last year, talking about how if we have a good idea, the odds of us coming up with realistic, real world reasons not to do it are very, very low. The reason that most restaurants fail within the first year is because people aren't looking at the downside. They just ignore it. They discount it. They don't focus on that. Most businesses go out of business in the first 5 years because of the same thing as you're not looking at. I've done it myself of looking at a plan, and I work hard to find all of the bad things that can happen within a business opportunity so that I can try to discount this because our brains are wired to ignore that. So staying boring is absolutely fundamental. It's very important to make sure that we don't get overly excited about individual companies. So number one, should you have individual stocks in your portfolio? Maybe. My personal recommendation, and I think this is backed by experts for years and years, it goes back to modern portfolio theory, back to the 60s and 70s, is unless you can lose that money, probably not. Probably not, but that doesn't mean you shouldn't have them. It means probably not is, I would say, to get a properly diversified portfolio, owning individual stocks, you'd need well north of $1 million just to begin. So you have to be careful there. That doesn't mean you shouldn't own them. So you can take a portion of your portfolio that you can afford to lose and invest that way. I have a number of clients that do that have a small portion of their investments that is set aside, that they'll buy and sometimes sell different stocks that they're interested in. So there's nothing wrong with that. Number two, you want to look at the fundamentals. You don't want to just buy a good idea. There was a company back in the early to mid 80s in Boston, J. Bildner and Sons. Fascinating company. They were you think about fast casual dining today. Jay Bildner invented fast casual dining. They were a yuppie-oriented food service company that owned a number of quote unquote restaurants, more like restaurant that we'd think of a Chipotle today is how they were. So it wasn't a sit down restaurant necessarily, although you could sit down, I believe. It wasn't a McDonald's where you went to the counter and it was already pre-prepared. It was kind of in between. And the yuppies at the time, the boomers today, hard to believe that yuppies turned into boomers, but they did, would go in there, they'd have their lunch, and they'd place an order, and they'd swing by right at the moment when they got out of work. They would grab their food, hop on the subway or the commuter rail or whatever, take it home, and they'd have dinner at home with their spouse. Man, this thing was, people were lining up to get in there. People were lining up to invest. They were expanding like crazy. And 2 years later, they were out of business because they got overly excited. Investors got overly excited. The owners got overly excited. They grossly overextended themselves trying to open as many locations as possible and went out of business. They didn't focus on the fundamentals. They didn't focus on, let's make sure that we're actually making money before we start expanding and doing more. Let's make sure we understand this. And the same thing with your stock portfolio is if you own stocks, I would say more often than not, buy stocks that are making money versus companies that are not. I look at the investors in companies like Uber, which I don't think is a public company yet. And it's had its struggles because of that. But there's been a lot of smart money that's been thrown at Uber in hopes that they kind of figure that out. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. Contrast that with a company like NVIDIA. And I'm not recommending you buy into these companies. But NVIDIA has been profitable for years, as far back as I can check. And it's skyrocketed over the last couple of years because it's AI and everybody wants AI. But you want to focus on those fundamentals. You want to focus on what is that company doing? And more importantly, what are they doing right? And that will help you make good decisions. And then number 3 is knowing when to sell. And that's a hard one. I'll give you Peter Lynch's modus operandi when he would buy a company. Is he said, I sell the company when the idea stops being a good idea. He said, not when they got to a certain price. He said, that's less relevant. He said, not when they hit a certain milestone they were trying to achieve. He was more focused on cash flow. How was the earnings growth, things of that nature. He said, that's when I'll sell. He said, I'm not going to worry about what the stock price is at that time. Sometimes the stock price will go down before there's a problem. And other times, the stock price will continue going up after the earnings get bad and after the financials get bad. I'll even out on those. But if I sell when it doesn't make financial sense anymore, that's a good time. And sometimes that's hard. You can take a company that had a good idea and now that idea has kind of run out, but they're making a boatload of money. Do you sell the stock or not? Not always easy, but something you should be looking at. But that's really it is again, I get a lot of people that are talking about individual stocks, and there's a lot of sensationalism going out because of AI, because the market's doing very well this year. I just wanted to caution people on that to make sure that you know what you're doing, that you're not overextended, and that you're not getting caught up in the hype. Because if you get caught up in the hype, there's what's the old saying on Wall Street is bulls make money, bears make money, pigs get slaughtered. That's what happens. Is the people that get caught up in the excitement are the ones that usually pay the price. So that's it for today. Thanks a lot. Check out the show notes to get in contact with us if you have any questions or have a good idea about a future episode or have questions about this episode. But until next time, stay safe out there.
Thank you for listening to Your Telecom Retirement with your host, Dennis O'Keefe. Please click the follow button to be notified when new episodes become available.